Randall, thanks for the really thoughtful introduction and orienting all of us to kind of what we might do with our time together. And it's so amazing to see people from such different places. And I just want to also, Micah, say hello to you. And I'm looking forward to our conversation. Just say, I'm going to offer a couple of quick comments and then Mike invite you to do the same. Before I was in higher education and the academy, I was a community and racial justice and labor organizer in the Bay Area for 10 years. And thinking back to that time, I think I thought very little about the right. I think I assumed I know what they are, I know what they stand for, how I'm against them. That wasn't our concern, other than some researchers who kind of tried to keep track of them. In the last 10 years, together with Micah and other colleagues and organizers, we've been going to lots of right wing spaces, a part of what I think is a kind of insurgent right. These, as we'll talk about, include Turning Point USA, the large conservative youth organization headed by Charlie Kirk until his recent assassination, Moms for Liberty, the kind of conservative parental organizing group around education, the Conservative Political Action Committee or Conference, CPAC, Trump rallies, talking to people, listening to what brought them there, and trying to get our own sense of the culture of these places. And Micah, before I just turn it over to you to say a couple of things about that, I want to just make three quick points. The first is we don't go to any of these gatherings to try to figure out how to meet the right halfway on things, right? To try to invest in or incorporate some of the shrill nativism or transphobia or demonizations that we hear there. That's not the point. You can go there without simply kind of mirroring it back. So that's not why we're there. The second thing is that the expansion of the right today is deeply tied to many of the challenges that pro-democracy, organizing, climate justice groups are facing. To get to one of the punchlines, they figure out something about the deep feelings of cynicism, isolation, and exhaustion that people from across the political spectrum, after decades of disinvestment, neoliberal policy, crisis after crisis experience. And what we've really noted is how their organizing is calibrated to that moment in ways that I think much progressive organizing still hasn't caught up with. So there's a kind of new terrain, and the right has really figured that out. And then the third thing is we are just getting some things wrong about the right. We are not going to say all the things you might imagine, the demonization, the racism, the hierarchy, the patriarchy, the Christian nationalism, they are there. But those elements alone do not explain the kind of insurgence, the ability of the right at this moment to reach so far into the progressive base. And wow, so many people will say to us, I have no idea why people are drawn to this. And oh yeah, my cousin is deeply into this now. They know people in their lives. So I want to say it's complex. We're often, disoriented by it, but we think it's imperative for us to understand what's going on because it relates directly to the future of social justice and pro-democracy movements. Micah, I just want to invite you to come in to share a couple of your thoughts here, and then we're going to share some slides, some images from what we've seen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. And thank you all for being here. I'm really excited for this discussion. And it's great to see people from so many countries and different places. So I really came into this work. I started grad school wanting to study why white women support the Republican Party in such large numbers. So I've been really drawn to questions of why groups would support a party that seems to really act in ways that are completely opposite to their interests. And when I started grad school in 2020, even though Joe Biden won the election, there was a lot of movement by people of color to the right. And no one in my American politics classes were talking about this. People were not theorizing about why. People weren't really talking about the implications. So when Dan asked me to work on this project, I was really excited and interested. But I also had a lot of assumptions of my own about what might draw people to the right. I thought that these people wanted to be white. I thought that they were misinformed. I thought that they just didn't care about people of color, particularly. And through talking to these people, a lot of my assumptions have been proven wrong. Most people do not come to the right because they're searching for an ideology. They come because they're searching for meaning in a world that has provided so little. They're searching for places that they can feel at home, people that they can trust in a time of institutional collapse and a time of increasing precarity and loneliness. And by the time that people get on the right and like take on this right wing ideology, they join this community that feels like home. And they are offering belonging and ritual in and story in a way that the progressive movement just hasn't figured out how to counter at this. So we often people frame the right as a collection of lies and conspiracy theories. And while that may be true in a lot of areas, for its followers, it's a moral world that makes sense and gives them coherence and belonging. And I think it's important that we take the impact of what they're saying really seriously, even if what they're saying isn't true, because that just makes this all too easy to dismiss. And we won't actually understand it. And we have to if we want to build something that's stronger.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate that point about taking seriously. And we ask people these questions all the times in these spaces. What brought you here? And the surprise in the both variation we get on that answer and that sense that the spaces do provide things for people. They certainly don't, in almost all cases, remedy the real crisis they feel. But it's just to suggest, as you just said so clearly, that it's simply about distortion, misinformation, misses what's actually happening. So, Mike, I'm going to share some of the images. So just phrase it, we're going to do about 15 minutes. The images that we're going to share here are from one of our 2 visits to Turning Point USA, an organization that many people became more familiar with after the killing of Charlie Kirk this September, at a conference they call America Fest or AmFest that takes place in the Phoenix Convention Center each December. It's coming up now as well. I think the first year we went, there was 13,000 people. We'll show some images from that. Last year, there was close to 20,000 people. And we want to use these images to show some of the arguments we're trying to make about the sense of belonging, the diverse inroads into it as well. Get started here. Just to help just orient you there, this is an event that takes over the entire Phoenix Convention Center. So there's a huge stage, as you can see before it. It's a picture of Steve Bannon, the far right strategist, and speaking to a large crowd in the arena. And you can see on the left, there's this kind of array of cultural figures, elected officials associated with the kind of MAGA world. These are not so-called like establishment Republicans. If someone like the Dick Cheney, who recently passed away, were to walk into this arena, he would be booed madly, as would the Bushes, the Clintons, anyone. It has this feeling of insurgency. And that's, and I just have to emphasize how, what the kind of the sensory quality of it, how it's like stimulating, how many lights, sounds, music everywhere it is. Turning Point as an organization is run, one of its programs, and there's many, are high school chapters. So you'll see thousands and thousands of high school and college students, much more diverse than we would have imagined, from lots of different parts. And this is partly reflects Turning Point's efforts and investments. They are at community colleges, regional public institutions, trying to recruit people there, trying to engage people about their ideas, concerns, et cetera. Many people have seen those kind of Charlie Kirk debate me things. Those are actually just a small part of the organization's program. Much more prevalent is their work they're doing to build and identify local leaders on campuses. And I'll just also say, often places that no progressive groups are present in, all over the country. They have a photo booth, which just happens at weddings and cruise ships and others, and they have it here. And I just shared some of these images. They sent them all to us afterwards to give a sense of the kind of like frivolity and kind of party atmosphere, like a cruise ship that they're trying to cultivate everywhere. And other than these ones with, this is Candace Owens, the right-wing influencer, Tucker Carlson, you looked at many of these images, you would not be able to imagine that they are from a right-wing conference. And that's partly what's so jolting. And the first year I went, I thought I should put a blazer on and kind of dress up as a middle-aged Republican. And I went in and realized the joke was on me, because it was just like a Saturday at the mall. There's people from so many different kind of like walks of life, points of view. And that's what's really startling about this. It's not how you often think, the either kind of homogenous Christian nationalist gathering or the young college Republicans. They've tapped into a new kind of inroad into these politics. So what we'll talk about here is, and I'll ask Mike, anything you want to set us up in the beginning, new inroads into the right, ones that are not centered on interests, politics, and policies. It's really remarkable how little you hear about policy. You don't hear about Milton Friedman. You don't hear about, age-old conservative texts. It's really about connecting people together and how calibrated it is to the political and cultural moment. Mike, anything you want to add here before we go through more of these?
Yeah, just building on that, really want to emphasize that these entry points, as Dan said, are very low stakes that feel safe and resonant with people. They're not explicit political recruitment drives, so they can also often be missed. So it happens through cultural idioms. So think about like podcasts about men taking responsibility or soft life influencers talking about wellness. These pages can all lead folks down these rabbit holes. And then it ends up really politicizing them. So really, they really emphasize belonging comes before belief. So it's all about socialization, not actual political persuasion.
And they're, thanks for putting it. So they're very, very clear about that. One of their main influencers, Alex Clark, said, "We want to make friends first. The facts will come later." And I want to be clear, they have every interest in socializing people into deeply reactionary worldviews. But the admission, much like you might think like for an evangelical church, if you were to say, "But I don't know if I can go in, I'm not a believer," the response would be, "Come through, come through, come through. We'd love to just have you here." And you get a sense of that kind of heterogeneity as you move through these spaces. I want to say a little bit about Turning Point USA was founded in 2012. This is Charlie Kirk when I think he was 18 years old. And it became infamous in its early iterations right after that, before Trump was elected, for these kind of stunts on campus. So you see this as a so-called affirmative action bake sale. It's a kind of like racist stunt designed to suggest like different prices based on one's race as a criticism. And I remember seeing this at first and I thought, this is second Obama term, big multiracial coalition. How out of touch must they be, thinking that this was going to have some resonance with people? But what I realized is this didn't just tap into, I'm sure some self-identified, bigots were like cheered on by this, but it was meant to actually just provoke kind of laughter and ridicule at institutions in general. And I think and I would never suggest it's not, it's saturated with these kind of racist overtones. There's something underneath it, which is recognizing, remember, this is just out of the housing crisis. College is becoming more expensive. The sense of like, where is my future lying? They're tapping into something, that sense of like, something is broken here. And and saying this thing that's so provocative shows that they're willing to call something out. So this was, looking back at this, a reminder that it wasn't just about appealing to people who might be drawn to the kind of bigotry you can see here. Kurt gets connected to the Trump family in 2016. These hundreds of millions of dollars of donations come in, and within 5 years, this 18-year-old has this budget of well over $150 million and builds the state-of-the-art media complex. He doesn't build a lobbying think tank in Washington, D.C. He builds a media complex with dozens and dozens of influencers and young leaders and electoral capacity. And we'll talk about others. So he's very, very cute. And Mike, I want you to just say something, because it's built based on this idea that comes from this right-wing figure, Andrew Breitbart, that politics is downstream from culture. Politics is downstream from culture. And what you've seen that kind of resonates with.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we are at these spaces, one of the moments that has been the most surprising for me is last time we went to Turning Point, I spoke with a group of young Black women who were all there, had gone many times. They were all big fans of Kansas Owens. And before we started about talking about politics and we were just talking about culture, I could have been with my Black women friends in Brooklyn. Like, it felt very resonant. Like, we had a lot of the same cultural touch points. We had a lot of the same references. But then when it came to actually talking about our politics, that is when the differences in how we were socialized came to fruition, and I could really see. Um, so a lot of these women and some of the men we spoke to, they're brought in because they've seen things about like natural living or detox, or like even seeing trad wives. That is a very appealing type of way to live, particularly for women of color who have often been relegated to like low paying service job, low wage jobs. So when you see content from someone, even if it's aspirational and you're not going to end up like Nara Smith, these messages of, oh, you just need to live a soft life. And like there is actually a natural order where men should be taking care of you and women should be doing this. Even if people aren't replicating these things exactly or adhering to them exactly, it's a very powerful appeal culturally. And it's just reinforced again and again and again by all these different things people are seeing on their algorithms and in podcasts and on TV shows. Media Matters has this really, really great analysis where they show the overwhelming amount of influencers online are actually right leaning, and that the left doesn't actually have a huge foothold. And that while a lot of this content may be seen as apolitical, if you actually look at it, it does promote things that are aligned with right wing ideologies. So people are really going in slowly and then being slowly politicized. And then by the time it happens, it's maybe too late for progressive organizers. And you finally notice that they think this way. And it's like, well, they are already see themselves as part of this community. So people aren't organizing because they've been persuaded. They've been persuaded because they've already been organized in like emotional and social ways online, largely.
And I think, Mike, I think that's such an important point because I think, especially after Kirk's killing, you saw just on a repeat reel, all of these really, really just bigoted, aggressive, demonizing things he was saying. But that's just one site among many. Even his own podcast, that's not the only kind of content. So there's just dozens and dozens of figures within the Turning Point kind of like media ecosystem. And then at the AmFest itself, many, many hundreds more small YouTube hosts, podcast hosts, other kinds of influencers. No Fox News, no big networks. You have a sense of how dense this is. It's not just Joe Rogan. It's really it's meeting people where they are in that sense. I just want to just offer a couple of things here to give a sense of there's workshops at these events in addition to the big kind of arena. Last year, you'll see hundreds of people at this workshop on our kind of breakout session on Black conservatism that really spoke about the narration here is that liberals and the left had long stigmatized and excluded any Black person that expressed any conservative politics, but this was their kind of coming out about their commitment to Black communities, Black uplift, but that liberalism and liberal solutions have failed Black communities. And so the turn to the right is about entrepreneurship. It's about faith. It's about self-determination. And while many of the folks Mike and I interviewed, and I wrote a essay this past summer in the New York Times about the people of color I spoke to who are kind of moving to the right, the analysis they had of their own material conditions was often not something we disagreed with, about the fatigue from facing segregated schools, growing debt, housing crisis, on and on. Now, we disagreed that conservative solutions are going to address those, but their sense that liberal remedies had been exhausted is not something unfamiliar to left-wing space. And I wonder, Mike, if anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, there I think is a deep sense of mistrust in all these institutions across politics, across the political spectrum. And the left really has to center the state in our solutions. And these are institutions that people don't really trust anymore. And the right, on the other hand, they get to center community and say, actually, we know these institutions are a problem, and therefore you have to rely on yourself and this other like small community that you built who aligns with you, and everyone else is the enemy and is the problem. And that is a real challenge for progressives, is we have to figure out how we can still defend these public systems, even as trust in them is crumbling for reasons that are very valid and that I think we all could talk for a whole webinar about. So, yeah.
Thanks. This is a panel on kind of Latinos in action at Turning Point. You can see some of the both the panelists. And so I just want to make this important point. And you'll see others. Identity is everywhere. They are constantly talking about gender, about race, even about racism, and about conservative approaches to addressing racial inequality. So this is a different kind of right-wing formation than what I was often thought about, which is the right is either demonizing or it proclaims a kind of thin racial colorblindness. And those elements are there, but they recognize that identity is a key way that people express themselves. It's an aesthetic, and it's something they absolutely organize around. This is player Jonathan Isaac for the Orlando Magic, who has a kind of religious athletic gear, judo wear. And, Mike, if you want to talk about just the huge number of booths and exhibitions, issues, it's like Comic-Con Lollapalooza for just so many different right-wing issues.
Yeah, as Dan said, when we came the first time, we were like, we got to put on our business suits and we have to look all, like we're ready here for a meeting. But really, it looked more like a Taylor Swift concert. People were dressed in sparkles. They were so excited. Outside of Alex Clark's talk, there was a line of teenage girls who were like frothing at the mouth to go meet her and ask questions from their hero. And then you walk into the exhibition hall. There is every type of product you could imagine, from coffee that is supposed to be more organic and biologically pure than other coffee. There is makeup line where the makeup is, free of toxins and other things that you wouldn't want to be putting on your skin. There's a place you can go to get supplements so that, because the medical industry has failed so many people, you just take it into your own hands and buy these supplements. So there's so many different booths, like every single person in there could find some booth to go to, and they could find a solution for one of the many problems that brought them there, and find people who are willing to talk to them about it in relatable ways. So it's just like the complete opposite, I think, of a lot of these like left organizing conferences you go to, where you just go to a booth and hear someone's pitch. You go to their booth, they talk to you about their story, they want to hear your story. It's very affective, even if it's, again, not grounded in a whole lot of truth.
Or solutions. Thanks, Inka. And I just want to talk here. I mean, this is Michelle Bachmann, who is a longtime, very right-wing congresswoman from Minnesota. So there are elements of, kind of the right corners of the GOP. She's now a dean at an evangelical university. So this is Jack Posobiec, who kind of came to public prominence as around the so-called Pizzagate incident as a kind of conspiracy theory monger. So you'll hear something like this on the stage. It's just startling when he says, "We are demonizing white Christian men. Why should my two white Christian boys have to apologize? I'm sick of apologizing. I'm not making peace with these people ever again." I mean, I heard his speech and I thought this text could be actually just from a Charlottesville white supremacist rally. And then you'll go around the corner to a workshop led by suburban moms who are talking about caring for their babies in schools and the importance of parental voice and having a say in the curriculum. So there's so many different lanes that it kind of activates in this way, very, very intentionally. This is Chris Chavez and Matthew Martinez, two young Latino organizers, actually, who are, although very senior in Turning Point's political action, leading a workshop for hundreds and hundreds of activists about their electoral game plans. Very, very sophisticated efforts to move small numbers of votes in swing states, driven by data. This is just one among, I think, 100 slides we showed about that strategy after the election. And the images at the bottom are of people that were hired in local precincts 6 months in advance of the election, because they argued having a stranger show up at your door, knock on it, and tell you about an issue policy moves no one. People want relationships. They want to feel connected. They want to feel heard. So they identified a few hundred precincts with low frequency Republican voters, spent lots of money hiring local residents to connect with them, and then built from there. And I thought they have an analysis of how people are kind of checked out and withdrawn, and the kinds of organizing strategies that need to take place. Influencer retreats, activism, you'll see how they navigate the politics of immigration here, distinguishing between kind of good, virtuous immigrants who follow the law and those that obey the law and are to be excluded. And I included that just to show that that's how they navigate the sense that it's only about nativism. They say that's not what we're talking about. And while they double down on nativism all the time, I just want to say they're alert to the risk that this will come off as extremist. And I wonder, Mike, if you can remember just other examples of how they kind of present themselves as kind of seemingly mainstream in this way.
Yeah, I think there's also a question in the chat that I think relates to this about, are you guys seeing LGBTQ folks at these spaces? And we absolutely are. And I think this is like a really effective example of how they bring people in ways you wouldn't expect. The first time we went, there were a bunch of people with backpacks that said Gays Against Rumors on it. And we looked into the organization, and it is founded by a Latina lesbian woman. And it is essentially LGB people against trans folks, and saying that we don't want trans people. They are not the normal gay people, to borrow J.D. Vance's term. But then at the same time, we also have met someone who studies trans folks who are on the far right and who are far right activists. So that is really to say that we have all these assumptions about who belongs at these spaces and who might feel comfortable, but they are making an effort to bring in a ton of people. The last time we went last year, I decided this time to be open about the fact that I'm queer, and no one blinked an eye. And I think it also, in fact, affirms people, because if a Black queer woman can be at that space, then that means they don't have to say, well, this, of course it can't be racist, or we're not homophobic. Like, these people are on our side too. So it really makes the hierarchy that they're purporting feel natural, if people of color and queer people are also on their side.
And I think just to this point about this, kind of legal and illegal, that distinction between the worthy and unworthy, the good and the bad, is precisely how they navigate it for all these groups. They're always valorizing and holding up one as a way to disavow and attack another. And then, Mike and these are just some, there's all these giveaways, you just walk around with like bags and people are constantly giving you, but you can see the aesthetics of these, how much they borrow actually from kind of liberal left social justice and progressive feels, one with a Bob Marley quote about emancipate yourself from mental slavery. I don't know, Mike, if there's other things, just to say here about this, and then we'll move to the last part, but about just the aesthetics that we encounter there.
Yeah, the right, they're very attuned to the fact that I think if the left could use a lot of these phrases and a lot of these slogans, but actually not deliver materially on a lot of it, why can't the right? And they are also very adaptive. So they're using this cultural fluency and taking it on so that they can make all of this look fun, and they can make all of this look like very normal. It's kind of a politics of memeability and humor that I think that the left just really hasn't adapted to. We haven't figured out how to use memes and funniness and all this cynicism to actually advance our own politics in the way that they have. They're very attuned to people's concerns with beauty and looking good, and like not pretending that these things aren't things that people take seriously. Like, people take desire very seriously, and the left often treats that as, I think, a false consciousness. But this is actually something that we have to be attentive to if we want to understand why people think about this.
And just the last thing I'll say here is you can see, part of what's also remarkable is they're not watering down their politics at all, right? You can see all these things that are about, they're anti-trans, there's, things that are against reproductive autonomy that are actually expressions of Christian nationalism. But it comes to you in these kind of like a very, very soft and seemingly harmless aesthetic, such that if you're walking around, you don't feel like you're in a kind of extremist space in that way. Lots, especially in the last year. But all this about health and wellness and frustrations that young women face navigating the medical system, I'll say existed on Turning Point way before MAHA and RFK. It was very, very strong there. And they understood this was a way to help. They were feeling like they were making progress among young men and bringing them to the right, but having less success with young women. And they very deliberately invested in these strategies, podcasts, et cetera, as a way to address that gender gap to great success. Um, Again, other examples of the kinds of aesthetics. This is actually a pro voucher, which is a kind of school privatization scheme, but drawing on these aesthetics of Black protest hip hop culture as well. Just a last few children's books, homeschooling kits, lots and lots of things you could take and do individually as part of the kind of aesthetic. This is the hangout room they set up for students. And you could just see how, again, attentive they are to experience and how little there is in many of these spaces about politics and policy. Mike, maybe we could just, in these last couple, this was the Trump rally we went to in the South Bronx last spring before the election. Many people said the only people who are going to go to this are Trump bros from Long Island and New Jersey to share what we saw there.
Yeah, it was incredibly diverse. You couldn't even get in also because there were so many people there. And we were actually in line with a Jamaican woman and her son. And they, as Black immigrants, are, I think, the face of people who you would not expect to be aligned with this movement. But they had a very coherent story about why it is they were at that rally and why it is they continue to support the right. I saw women in hijabs. I saw people wearing the Pan African Pride shirt. There were people speaking in Spanish. Like it was truly very multiracial, and people were expressing their identities. And I think that's something that we assume like is not present at these spaces. But it really could have been like any other concert that took place in the park, but it wasn't. Like it was a Trump rally. And I think that going to these spaces and really like talking to the people and seeing what brought them there is crucial for organizers who actually want to understand why it is they're there.
And you can see, I mean, even the sign Trump for social security, for social justice, for police authority, no more massacres, how much of a kind of borrowing, how heterodox it was. Everyone we talked to seemed to have different accounts of what brought them there. But I would say the one thing they rested on was a deep sense of cynicism and frustration and anger at status quo politics. And that Trump had positioned himself as the insurgent truth teller who was calling it. People had lots of different things to say about what they wanted, what they thought Trump could do, but that was the one shared kind of feeling. So just to, finish this off again, these new inroads to the right, they're not centered on interest, politics, and policies, and they're calibrated very much to the current cultural and political moment. And I think, Mike, as we are going to end and go into, I'll stop there. You were going to talk a little bit about what as we get to questions, like what the challenges are now, what this means for progressive organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. So this obviously, as people have been saying in the chat, offers several challenges for progressives. And to summarize them up, I think the first is that the right is offering like an emotional resonance with their arguments, and they're offering clear identity and purpose and pride. While progressive movements, and this isn't always, but often are leading with analysis instead of affect. Like, here's my policy plan. I always think back to Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election, like during the debate when her team sent out like here's a fact check website. You can go and like fact check all of Donald Trump's inaccuracies. Like that is not the political mode that is working for folks anymore. They've also, again, as you said, built belonging community. They've built these very tight-knit online and offline networks that feel like home for people. There is mistrust of institutions, which we've talked about before. They are capitalizing on this disillusionment with government and nonprofits and political parties as a whole. And again, this is terrain that progressives we still really rely on to deliver change. They also have these gendered and moral appeals. And in a time where people have a lot of questions, quite frankly, about gender and what that means, and a lot of difficult questions, they are offering belonging and safety and respect in these patriarchal terms, but directing them towards control rather than collective care. And that's not something that we figured out really effectively how to counter. They also have narrative simplicity. They have really figured out an effective way to translate these very complex grievances into moral clarity. So they say like the system is corrupt, so you have to protect your family. And progressives, we don't really have a unified message around our narrative yet. Like we can't agree on what that is. And until we figure out how to address all of these things, and I see a lot of people in the chat like talking about how it is we're going to do it, we are going to continue to struggle to counter them. And we're not going to, again, understand why it is we're seeing all of these folks we assumed were part of our movement moving away from it.
Thanks, Mika, for summing that up so well. So we have about 20 minutes. We have lots of great questions and some things to follow up on. So let's go through them together. Does that sound good, Micah?
Yeah,
Kind of figure those out. So, there was a question in the chat that was about how to understand the distinction between kind of what's said from the stage, right? And then what people feel. And I think this is so important because the right's position is, well, all 20,000 people that come to this mirror back our beliefs. They identify as Christian nationalists. They want mass deportations. They don't believe in, public schools, et cetera. That is just not true. And I certainly don't want to suggest, no, that's, it's coursing with ideas about shared mutuality and liberation. That's not true either. But there's a lot more, to the point we made, people coming in with questions. And we had a colleague who went to the Young Women's Leadership Summit, which is a smaller gathering in June. And a lot of the mainstream coverage about it was how Charlie Kirk kept saying, get married, get married, get married, have kids. That's all that matters. And that's, if you read the Times and the Post, that's what they said. Our colleague that went said, yeah, he said that. But what I saw from the kind of back of the room was lots of women with lots of other who challenged him, including one woman who said, why did you call this a Young Women's Leadership Summit if you're telling us not to be leaders and to just fulfill these domestic roles? And again, I'm not suggesting that it was there's tons of attacks on feminism, on reproductive autonomy, anti-trans attacks. But I think it's actually good news in some ways because it means that this is a group of folks who are not fully aligned with that, right? They're coming there because they have questions, because they have anxieties. And just the last thing is she said, look, the questions people had were real. They wanted to know why, they wanted to have conversations about family. They wanted to have conversations about young women's health. They want to have conversations about kind of in a moment when there's so much focus on men's loneliness, where that leaves young women. And again, no, shared solutions, but absolutely a willingness to talk to people. I wonder, Mike, if you see just other examples of that, including among the kind of Black organizers and attendees that we talked to.
Yeah, there's a couple examples that jump to mind. So I think first in Alex Clark's panel, where she again spoke a lot about how the best thing a man can do is get his girlfriend off birth control. Or she talked about the importance of having children. And that was really the main point of the panel. Where after she spoke, I overheard a young woman in line who was talking to her friend. They were maybe 15, 16 years old. And the young woman was saying to her friend, I never want to have kids. I know that, but I still love Alex Clark and I still want to be a part of this movement. So that's going to be my question for her is how, I never want to be a mom. How can I reconcile that and still support this? So even though this young woman, you would think that someone who never wants to have kids and is certain about that at such a young age would not be drawn into this formation, she still saw a place and she felt comfortable asking her idol a question that she clearly knew that she didn't agree with. So I think that's one thing. And there was also a young Black man who we spoke to last time we were there. And I asked him what drew him into the conservative movement. And his whole family's Democrats, grandparents, his parents, and they always have been. And he said in 2016, he voted for Bernie, or he voted for Bernie in the primaries. And then after what he saw as interference in the election, he had a lot of questions. He was very angry at the Democratic Party. And when he voiced these questions and these frustrations, he said people told him, don't talk about that. Don't ask that. That's not what we're going to talk about, essentially. And that being shut down like that caused him to go online, look for the answers elsewhere. And now he has a political account that's essentially the Shade Room, which if folks don't know is a very big online platform that's aimed at Black celebrity and entertainment and fashion. He essentially runs the Black conservative version of the Shade Room now. So people are going to these spaces with questions, and people are saying, okay, yeah, let's talk about it instead of just shutting it down. I think that is so crucial to understand.
Yeah, and just what Micah, that also just makes me think about how we often think about it's about misinformation, but how people will often start with a real question. Why is it that I have, and you'll hear this from the stage all the time. Why, young people, why do you have to wait until you're probably in your early 40s before you can even think about buying a house, having a family, starting something else? Why is that? Now, many progressives would say, well, that's why we need to address student debt and make college, affordable and put the economy right back. They're of course not interested in those solutions, but they're naming all of those problems. And once you've named the problems, you're then drawn into lots of other kinds of effects. So I just want to reinforce, Micah, that sense that the experiences of abandonment and frustration and disillusionment, I often was like, what, they're very, very resonant in that way. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And in that sense, it's not just disinformation, right? It
Mm-hmm.
starts with something else. The disinformation is surely there. Um, let's see, what question should we go to next? There's a question about donor money that I think is important. And I'll just say this, and then, Micah, to add, like, we were at Moms for Liberty, which is the kind of right-wing parents group. They have their annual conference in Orlando. And we were struck that the base of people there was actually a pretty small meeting. There was probably like 300 kind of parents there, but the array of conservative, very powerful conservative organizations aligned around all of them was really, really something. Heritage, law firms, all these kind of parent rights groups that were there. So I absolutely think they have figured out how to leverage the like vast resources of right wing the kind of infrastructure, and then use it to resource even what is a relatively small handful of committed activists. Yeah, I don't know other examples of where we've really seen the rights money in action in these events, Mike.
Yeah, I think if you think about Blexit, that's a great example too. Candace Dillon started in, I think, 2018. And she really didn't have many resources behind it. She claims that, Kanye West created the design for her, which then he said wasn't true. But really, it didn't have that much of a program. Turning Point decided to fund it, I believe, the year after that. And now they claim to have members in every 50 states. And even as we've gotten to Turning Point, we've seen how last year or in 2023, Blexit went from having, one or two panels, like a couple of smaller events, to last year being able to fill a room with almost all Black conservatives. They have a ton of money now. They have a huge presence. They're starting to go to HBCU campuses and recruit there. So they really have a keen eye for picking out these figures that have a message that will be resonant and then just giving them the money and the resources to do what they're already doing.
I was struck, Mike, also how many people told us, like, I just mentioned I was interested in organizing, and then
Mhm.
just sent me a check and said, do what you want to do. And they hosted things that sometimes were like, weren't really coded even as right wing, right? Just they called themselves liberation shows and other kinds of things. So I was really, really struck in so many of these. I mean, it's absolutely right. Kirk and many of these other organizations, you can't underestimate the money behind it, but they are also on the lookout for kind of committed activists and talent in so many ways. So it's very striking to see hundreds and hundreds of young people there who are beaming, right? So excited to feel
Mhm.
part of something. And when you ask them, they're often like, someone brought them there. I was involved in a campaign and someone said, you should come here. And it seemed to me so different than some, but not all progressive organizations where there's a real hierarchy. You have to wait in line, work your way up,
Mhm.
and spend years before you'll get some authority and autonomy. We were talking to 20-year-olds who were like running whole campaigns and
Mhm.
so committed, not feeling cynical or frustrated, but really feeling a part of something.
And again, I think they didn't have to have the right opinion at the beginning to join these groups, which I think is something that I find in a lot of leftist spaces. You don't already hold the opinions that you are supposed to when joining the group, then it's okay, go educate yourself and come back when you're ready to align with us. Not, okay, come in and then we will slowly educate you and talk about these questions with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a lot more variation and variance. I'll also say after, conducting a lot of interviews last summer, you can see after people spend time in these formations, it really does shape. They start mimicking back and echoing many of the points that someone like Charlie Kirk is saying from the stage. So I don't want to suggest that they have every intention, aspiration of socializing people into much more conservative worldviews, but they are just so alert that that is not the point of entry in that way and kind of tolerant and open for that kind of dissent. Yeah.
There's another question in the chat. I was hoping we could get to that's how do you think people with identities that are commonly targeted by the right still find a home within the party?
Yeah.
Do they look past the hate for other parts of themselves? And this is a question we get a lot, which is like, is there a limit to what people will tolerate in terms of racism or sexism or et cetera? And I think like my answer for that is a lot of people already perceive the Democratic Party as being racist or sexist. So Black voters, for example, have long put up with racism and mistreatment from the Democratic Party, but still continue to vote for the Democratic Party in large numbers. And then I think if you look at the question of like, well, how can women possibly vote for a party that is so antithetical to their interests? You look at the New York City mayoral race, it took the Democrats so long, if many of them did at all, to endorse Zoran Mandani. And they did endorse or were supportive of Cuomo, who is an admitted sexual harasser. So it's like the contradictions, like you can't say that the Democrats are the party of anti-sexism and anti-racism when that has been disproved so many times.
I just think it's such as you said, we get this question all the time. And also this sense of like buyer's remorse, right? Like when will people realize, oh, this kind of fever dream will go and they'll say, I now I realize my natural home is back with the, Democratic Party and our liberal policies. And I just felt like conversation after conversation, people were offering us very candid and sober assessments. They would say, look, my parents did that. My grandparents did that. Look where we are now. And so, and they was just, I felt it was very cute. They were like, I don't want to be lectured now about, making a different decision. We're in a two-party system. There's two options here. I'm going to go and check this out. A number of people said to us, look, I'm conservative, but I'm not MAGA. I'm not, all for Trump in every case. So what I really heard again and again is how, I'll just say this, often off-putting their sense of progressive movements are. I mean, I think someone told us last year, right, Micah, that turning point was Blit and the left was cringe. And I think that captures something, and I don't think it's just a matter of like, we need to bring some more music to our meetings and other things. It's not just something thin like that. There's something about, there's something approachable. And that's so difficult to get our heads around because it's like, why is this reactionary authoritarianism feel approachable? But it shows how much of our work we have cut out for us.
Absolutely.
I think we have time for just a couple more. Are there other, and I guess maybe Micah, because there's something about that question about like the left is cringe. You've thought a lot about that, about what it would mean to build, because it's something that could be understood as something kind of like, gestural, like it's just a performance about inclusiveness. And I wonder if you might be able to just say a little bit more about what that means in practice.
Yeah, I think it's again because what I said earlier, a lot of people feel like the left's claims to morality are actually on very thin ground. So it's like, how are you going to lecture me about XYZ when you're still, if you're a politician, you're still lining your pockets with money from the health corporations that I'm against? Like, how are you going to lecture me about being racist when, you supported this housing policy that got my grandma and like her family evicted, et cetera, et cetera. Like people are very aware of the contradictions. And the right has figured out a way, and I think this is crucial. They don't have to protect people in the same way that the left does. Because quite frankly, as we talked about throughout this presentation, there are groups that they will pit against each other, like good gay people versus bad gay people, good women versus bad women, good Hispanics versus bad Hispanics. So they just need enough people in those groups to see themselves as part of the good group and be against the bad part of the group, so that they can mobilize those feelings. But It's really like not, it's not about the facts. It's not about what people actually, um, or like not about the reality. It's about what people feel is their reality and about the things that they're experiencing.
I just want to build up on that and then maybe just to invite Randall back in a moment to close us out. But you just described something that's, and you've said it before, this, what I think of as an asymmetry. So for the right, if they just continue to deepen the cynicism, deepen the sense that you can't trust anyone, don't you see how you've been abandoned? Don't you see how nothing works? Don't you see how everyone's trying to take advantage of you? But what you can trust is yourself, your own hustle, your own entrepreneurship, your own faith, your family, your relationships. They don't need any more than that. They don't need everyone to buy into a policy around, tax breaks or, even policing and incarceration or immigration. They need people to feel in that sense that institutions can't be trusted, movements can't be trusted, experts can't be trusted. By contrast, almost all, and you said this, Micah, progressive goals require some belief in institutions, in expertise, in movements, in solidarity, in one another. And so, a lot of the work Mike and I with other colleagues are working as part of a new project called the Center for Applied Research on Democracy, or CARD. And, our argument there is our organizing has to start from that place. We can no longer assume that people are already, even people who feel frustrated and anger about housing, affordability, et cetera, that they're already aligned with our positions. So the organizing has to take that cynicism seriously. It has to take people's lack of experiences of solidarity, their experiences of loss seriously. It can't just put out a shared vision and imagine that everyone is going to line up behind it. And I just want to invite you, Micah, to close out with any last comments on that sense of how we organize in the face of this kind of de-alignment and cynicism.
Yeah, I think it's first the last we really need to reckon with our own ties to institutions. The right was forced to because Donald Trump won the primary, but the left just really has not had to reckon with that in the same way. We need to not just fight the beliefs that they're espousing, but we have to compete for belonging. We need like emotionally invisible resonant communities that we don't have right now in the same way. Unions and neighborhood groups and churches and mutual aid networks, they need to also be infused with like moral imagination and storytelling and ritual in ways that the right has really figured out how to do. And again, we need culture and humor and everyday life to have be a part of our movement building. And this does not mean the DNC paying influencers up to $8,000 a month to like espouse their talking points. That means we need to like think really deeply at our local places and spaces about how people are being brought into the left.
Taking their experiences seriously, taking that they're not just audiences that we need to message better, that they're agents, that politics is not just a spectacle, that it's something we do and produce together. And people have to start with those experiences. And as you said, there's so many opportunities through unions, through civic organizations, faith organizations to do that. So I just want to end on that positive note about how much promise there is. We're no longer in a position where we can imagine that the approaches we've inherited are adequate for the future. I'm so grateful for this time, Randall and Micah. I always love being in conversation with you. And I'll turn it back to you now, Randall.